Great Friday. Welcome to the King Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined today by Kay Sparling. She's an international opera singer, educator, and author of Mission THAW. So, welcome to the King Connections podcast. Kay, how you doing today?
I'm glad to be here. I'm doing fine. And thank you for having me on.
Glad you're here. One of the things I like to begin with, and this is one of the questions we ask every guest that joins our show, just really set the context for the energy level around our discussion. That
Mhm.
is, what's your spiritual energy number right now? Being from zero, life sucks, to 10 being life is awesome. Where would you say you fall into it?
Oh, I would say, a good 9 right now.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah,
That's great. And thank you for answering that question for me. The reason I asked that question, because often learned the hard way that if people, when I'm in meetings or on the podcast or whatever, there's going to be a group of folks engaging in communication. If you don't really assess that, and or you do ask that question, someone's anything below a 5, the energy is going to be off. They're not going to be present, most likely. They're going to be adversarial. It's not going to be a good meeting. And sometimes it's best just to reschedule instead of just going through with it just because it's scheduled and the person's could be dealing with a lot of reasons. A lot of things could be causing someone to feel
sure.
less than what they want to be at that time.
Hmm.
But the contrast is when people say anything above 7, it's going to be a wonderful conversation. We're going to be engaged. Uh, our minds are going to be open for a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to it. So that's why I always ask that question. Kind of sets a tone.
Totally makes sense. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I want to get started with really is to really kind of set the context of who you are and our discussion for today and talk about your book and everything. But can you give me like a brief intro about who you are, kind of your journey, and then we get into some questions beyond that to really kind of
Sure.
explain a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I've had an interesting journey, but I think all human beings at my age probably have,
Hmm.
That's nothing uncommon. But my journey is at the age of 7, I became a professional singer. And I was singing Broadway and sacred music for years and years, and went and got my first degree in that vein, in music ed and that kind of thing. And as time went on, I became an international opera singer and had been doing that for decades. And right before 9/11, I went through a nasty divorce, and I decided that the international opera world wasn't for me anymore. And so I started, along with some other opera singers that wanted to settle down, not live out of a suitcase, be with their families. Um, we all started a school together, and we put one out on Long Island, we put one down in southern Manhattan. And lo and behold, 9/11 happens.
Hmm.
And, you know, besides losing a lot of dear people, for all of us, we lost our school. And so at that point, I realized I did not grow up in New York City. I grew up in central Illinois. I decided to come back to the Midwest and use the first degree I had ever worked on, which was music ed. And I was going to start a conservatory of music and acting. And I looked at all the region, and I ended up starting a school in the upper Midwest, north of where I was raised. And had been working on that from 2002 when I left New York. Before I left New York, I did sing a lot of the masses and services for the fallen service people of 9/11, because I had worked for the mayor's office before, and I had also worked for many churches singing. And so I had a lot of healing to do, not only the losses that I had, but also just going through that daily almost. Those huge funerals and memorial masses and stuff.
Hmm.
So I said, one thing that will heal me is to teach because I love young people. And so I started teaching both high school and college. I became a vocal coach, and I since then have trained, I just don't even know how many professional Broadway singers, um, sacred singers, opera singers, even country and R&B and rock, you name it. I've put them out there from this whole area, and everything was going wonderful in 2005. And then what happened was COVID, the pandemic, and of course everything was shut down. All arts were shut down, and I basically lost my living. And so at that point, we did what I could. We did productions on YouTube and that kind of thing, but it was very rough on my students. It was rough on my professional singers. It was horrid. It was a horrid time, and I literally had to, at the age of 62, learn a new career just to make a living. And I was very blessed that one of the parents of one of my students had she's a judge, and she had the opportunity to hire me and train me. And she said, "I'd love to do this. You did so much for my daughter." It was a real blessing, and I don't know what I would have done if that hadn't come around. So at that point, I started a new career. And going back to 2015, I had been trying to write a book, but life kept getting in the way, and the book would get put on the shelf. And finally, I got in a dear relationship. My partner, he just kept pushing me and saying, "Get back to that book. That book's really good. Get back to that book." And so, with more training and 5 edits later, drafts later, I finally was ready to publish a book, and I did in August of 2024. So my life has had a lot of different flows that certainly haven't just had one career, and it's always a journey. And you'd think, I'm 65 now, you'd think that might slow down, but it's not. I mean, it just keeps coming. And so I just believe that's the path I'm supposed to be on, and with the help of God and the people that I love, I just keep going and seeing what comes next. So.
Absolutely. Well, gratitude for sharing. I'm always curious because you're the first former opera singer that I've ever interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
So it brings a lot of questions to mind because I look at that particular discipline, that skill, and it looks very difficult to do.
Yeah.
And so my question is, what is the preparation like to perform at that level? That maybe rest, diet, conditioning, mental. You talk a little bit about any preparation period in total.
Well, first of all, to be an international opera singer, that means that you're in like class A. There are different classes of opera singer. To get to that point, probably most people have trained in a lot of disciplines, because the cool thing about opera is, if you look at the performing arts, is it uses all the different media. So you have singing, you have acting, you have costumes, you have sets, you have blocking, you have the orchestra, usually you have a foreign language. You have all these things coming together. So that's what makes it, in my eyes, and this is just my opinion, but I think it's much harder to perform opera than it is like musical theater, like a Broadway show, or to go sing the Messiah at a church, because everything has to come together all at once. That takes a great deal of study, a great deal of preparation, and a great deal of discipline. And not just the art has to be disciplined. You had to be disciplined with, like you said, your body, your health. I remember a famous interview that Luciano Pavarotti did a long time ago on 60 Minutes. And I was an aspiring singer at the time. So anytime anyone was interviewed, I was there. And they said, what's the most difficult thing every day about being the greatest opera singer on earth? And I believe he was at that time. And he said, waking up and seeing, the voce, is it no voce? Did you catch a cold on the plane? Or, and now you're out, you're out of business because, your vocal cords are sick, or are you in good voice? And of course, the greater singer you become, the more pressure it is that you're going all over the world. But when you land, you're supposed to be in great voice. They don't want to use that understudy. They don't want to cancel. And so it's a horrible feeling when I remember one time I got on a plane in New York, went over, got off in Vienna. And a day later, when we were supposed to start rehearsals, I just came down with this horrible virus, and of course, my agent and my assistant, they're doing everything they can to try to, make this go away. Obviously went to a doctor right away, but sometimes things just take time.
Right.
And of course, you're getting those, my agent's getting those phone calls every half hour. Is it better? Is it better? What are we going to call? What are we going to call? Because they have to let the understudy know a certain amount of time. And it's just like the pressure of letting people down is extraordinary at that point, and there's been cases where that can happen and they don't ever hire you again. Because remember when we hired her for Tosca and then she pooted out and wasn't able to sing for 2 weeks? I don't want to go through that again. And so, and the opera world's so small, the word gets out very easily. And then, then you're battling that. So to stay healthy is, besides learning your role and besides obviously executing it almost perfectly, you have to make sure that you're always taking care of yourself. And that means a lot of isolation, to be quite frank. Like when people want to come up and shake your hand after the show, you can't touch them, and, wearing masks as much as you can and just basically not being around the public so that, especially in the winter when things are going around, that you don't catch that. And so what I remember about my career are the worst and the best. The worst thing about being an opera singer was just what I told you. It just takes over your entire life, and the best thing about being an opera singer is hearing people, their reaction to your performance, that you moved them in some way. And I played a lot of historical characters, like, for instance, Joan of Arc, that, you definitely can empathize with that character. And then if you play the role well, then all that audience just gets drawn in and they feel like they walk away with more of an understanding of that historical time and that character.
Now, and I'm asking this question because from the operas I've been exposed to, they've all been in Italian. I was going to ask, is a large majority of operas that you perform in Italian, so you have to actually learn the Italian language in order to be an opera singer?
Well, okay. So remember when I told you there was regional singers and there were international singers?
Yes.
And that somewhere along the line in your training, you'll be pigeonholed into one of those two things. If you are singing at the Kansas City Lyric, and I did do an apprenticeship there when I was in graduate school, almost everything, no matter what it originally was composed in, you will sing it in English. If you're a regional singer in Germany, you will sing it in German. And it doesn't matter if it was originally, in Italian, you will sing it in German. But at the international level, they pride themselves in singing the vernacular of the composer, what they composed. And so, if Mozart wrote it in German, we do it in German. If he wrote it in Italian, which he did both, we do it in Italian. So if you go, you say you're on the East Coast. If you go to see something in DC, you're probably going to see the vernacular. But if you saw something in a smaller city on the East Coast, you're probably going to see it in English.
Mm.
But we international have to be able to be very fluent in what we sing, and not only know what we're singing about, but we have to be able to get that diction through the singing, so that, in case you do know Italian, that you can understand it. Um, Most of us specialize, and that has to do with what voice God gave us. There's all these different categories of voices. I am a dramatic um, Verdi soprano, which means that almost everything I sing is in Italian.
Mm.
But, if you're a Wagnerian soprano, everything you sing is going to be in German. And then some lighter voices will sing maybe French. So it just depends on what is suited for your voice, what you're trained for, is what languages you'll sing in. But I mainly sing in Italian.
Now, one quick question about your experience as an opera singer. And I'm wondering, when you are on stage and you're performing, how much are you mentally present doing that performance? Like, are you looking at the crowd, or are you like zoned out into your own world where you just focus on the getting the words right, or just letting the music come out of you? So what's kind of the thought process? Talk a little about that, please.
Well, that's kind of a tricky thing we do. And this is what I teach my students all the time, is that the audience must think you are seeing them and relating to them. So you kind of have to have that outer facade of that a bit. But really, inside of your head, you have what I call a grocery list. And you're thinking about, okay, am I singing the right notes? Am I singing the right words with it? Am I staying with the orchestra? Because you can't hear yourself. So you have to keep looking at that conductor to make sure you're with the orchestra.
Mm.
Because of these big opera houses, the acoustics are very tricky. You're worried about your acting. You're having to act a character in a scene. You have to think about your blocking so you don't trip over something in the set. I mean, there's like 12 things going on in your mind on this grocery list, and it has to go all the time. And
Mm.
then for something very difficult, let's say you're having a very difficult run in an aria, then that just goes into speed. But you get good, because these opera houses are so big, unless they have very good opera glasses, they can get really into your face. You get good at them thinking you are singing right to them, but the truth is you're thinking about all these other things, that you have to do in order to get the sound out. And so it takes a lot of work, and a lot of lessons, and a lot of rehearsals, and a lot of practice to
I
get
can,
that down.
I
Just
can
years and
believe it.
years. Yeah.
I can believe it. Now, I'm curious now, and I'm going to kind of set a context of what I like to focus on really during my show, and kind of guests I like to have on my show. So I look at individuals based on their behavior characteristics, things they've done in their lives, and do they fit this ideology or this framework that I didn't come up with a term, but I came up with a framework for what I consider to be fully human.
Yeah.
And I'm going to define that and then ask a question in that context. So I look at fully human, particularly fully human leaderships. I look at anyone who's choosing that path, and there's a path you choose. It's a journey. You don't. It's not a destination. You stay on that journey, being fully human, particularly as a leader. I look at it as a reclamation, a return to the truth that we are not here to dominate, compete, or prove our worth, but to co-create systems rooted in dignity, truth, and shared purpose. It begins when we shed the labels that divide us and embrace our innate identity as creative, connected, and conscious beings.
Hmm.
At its core, fully human leadership invites us to lead with wholeness, multiplying possibility by choosing connection over control and collaboration over competition. So the first pillar in my framework is identity. And people may not necessarily have articulated their identity as X and such, but their behaviors have shown that they identify more with a fully human identity, as opposed to I'm black, identifying by my race, or I'm a man,
Mm-hmm.
identifying by my gender or religion or political party, etc. And when you choose identity as fully human, then to me it forces you to see others as human beings as well. And then that kind of changes how the conversation and things work. It's now we're two human beings having a conversation with shared experiences, pains, troubles, and all the things that define our humanity. So my question for you, and you've gone through several different transitions in your life, opera singer to teacher to, as you say now,
Mm-hmm.
volunteer, supporter. And I'm curious to know, how would you say your identity has evolved over those different chapters and transitions? And who do you see yourself still believe that you're becoming as a result as you continue to grow as well?
Sure. Yeah. I actually reflect on that question a lot nowadays. Um, because you can't take your past away, but you can certainly learn from it, right?
Right.
Um, I believe that, if you look in every one of these areas of my life, if you take the singing, for instance, by the time that I knew that there was a very good chance I would become an international opera singer, and it took a while. It was a little heady at first because you know. You knock out 5,000 sopranos to get there, kind of thing. Um, I thought that I wanted to be a famous opera singer and that I wanted all the spoils of that, the jet set life and, you know, everything that basically, is depicted that an opera singer lives like. Think about Maria Callas and her life, that kind of thing. And I wanted to, make that my life.
Mm.
Um, as time passed, that did not suit me whatsoever, um, in any way. I just decided that I wanted to work very hard just to be a great artist and, take that artistry as far as I could, but not because it would make me rich and famous, just because it was it was very fulfilling for me as an artist to try and challenge myself. My coaches would always say, well, here's an aria that hasn't been sung in 3 decades, but if you think you could do it, and it'd take me a year to get that aria. And it's 16
Mm.
pages, a year to get 16 pages. But I would do it because I liked that challenge and I liked the idea of, taking it as far as I could. Now, what pivoted me to understand what all this was about in my life was when 9/11 happened. So here I am. I've sung opera with every great stage, with every great, male singer there is on the earth, and trained at all the great opera houses, including the Metropolitan Opera there in New York City. And now I'm asked to sing these funerals. Well, I'm certainly not going to sing opera. Obviously, I'm singing it sacred. Okay. And for me, at that point, I'm in just the, you know, limelight of my career. These, I could sing these funerals all day, right? And not even, you know, you know, get a sweat. But the thing was, what I wasn't prepared for, and no one on the team was prepared for, was the emotional capacity of those funerals and how long they would be in, and just everything. Um, it was certainly not like singing a regular church service or a mass. It was nothing like that. The dignitaries that would come in, and thousands of people in the cathedrals, thousands of people standing outdoors listening to speakers, um, you know, you know televised. And what really started happening to me was I realized that this was why God wanted me to learn how to sing that way,
Mm.
because we would do two a day, and these things would last about 2 hours, and there would be a lot of music. And I did that day in and day out, and day in and day out. And sometimes I had to learn a piece on the helicopters. We were going to the next cathedral because some family had requested something, and I'm sitting there with my little keyboard trying to figure out what, before I get there, what the tune is. And of course, I can look at the hymnal, but and so it was it was incredible. But what was most incredible was the emotional capacity, where I believe I was being used as a vessel to help heal people in the congregation.
Hmm.
And at first, it kind of occurred pretty quickly, where people were claiming, publicly claiming that they saw angels, they saw Mother Mary, they saw, when I would sing certain songs, especially at the offertory. And I cannot tell you what it meant to the families. Music is a tool that just sort of opens up and goes to heaven, and to have been a part of that, um, in any way, shape, or form, is the most blessed thing I've ever had to do with my singing. And here I had been singing since I was 7, on stage,
Hmm.
until I was 7. And yeah, I mean, I do people's weddings, I do people's funerals, but nothing like what these services were like. And so to find out that, that was the purpose all along, and that I was just a small catalyst of trying to heal these people that were very, very devastated by 9/11. That changed my whole philosophy of ever wanting to get back on stage. And then I just thought, well, you know, it's I'll continue doing this, but I'm just going to go into teaching. And that was the pivot on that one, um, as far as that goes, because I just felt that I had missed the boat really big time for a long time. I was kind of ashamed of that. And so at that point, I started trying to live a more authentic life and have much more loving goals, you might say, of
Hmm.
whatever I put into it. And the next thing I did, of course, was teaching. And so I was always very honest with the kids, no matter how young they were. Like, if you want to do this, it's different than you think it is. And so hopefully I was able to take a whole generation of singers and warn them about the pitfalls, of the industry, and try to teach them to surround themselves with people that had, you know, the correct philosophies about art, and not, all the moral traps that I ran into, you know. And I think we've done a pretty good job with that. So yeah, now I just try to be a catalyst for change, for all kinds of human rights issues.
That's excellent. That's excellent. You know, as you were sharing it, I was thinking about again the transitions you've had to go through, and I'm just curious to know from an intrinsic perspective. And I know you've gotten older with each transition, but if you can recall, where would you say you felt the most intrinsic value in performing that particular task, respond whether it's doing the opera, singing, teaching? Which one would you feel that would you say at the conclusion of a day you felt as though I've made the biggest impact?
Hands down teaching, because I've been able to touch so many young people's lives. And if you have because we're studying one on one, you get a you get a personal relationship with every one of those students. And you have to know what makes them tick. And then they have to trust you. They have to trust you. This is a really important thing with singing, because singing is very, very personal. It's a little more personal than playing a violin or a piano. It really is, because it's your own voice. And people can be very sensitive about that. And then, you got to work with the body, and everything. So they have to be very comfortable and trust you that, you're a good adult and you're not going to hurt them. And then from there, it's always about, I can't tell you. I mean, people have made jokes. My mother used to make jokes, because for a long time she lived with me at the end of her life. And she'd say, well, you've got that chair in the corner of your studio, that's your that's your therapist chair, because so many kids don't always have the strongest support systems at home. They just don't. And I like to go into schools where there were underprivileged situations. Okay. I like to promote diversity in the arts. So I don't always get the richest and most privileged kids. And sometimes that comes with some pretty rough backgrounds. And, they need someone to talk to, and they need someone to know that I'm in your corner. I have your back, and I'm going to help you through things. I fostered 3 kids while I was a teacher, because otherwise they were going to become wards of the court, so hands down, teaching was so healing for me personally, after all that 9/11 and the divorce and everything. It was so healing to be needed and to know that you were connecting with people in a very, very strong way, and to take kids literally, out of a ghetto and put them into a full scholarship at some place like Carnegie Mellon. Well, how much better does that get? And so you talk about enriching, and, I just hope at the end of the day, I never forget that feeling, because it's a wonderful feeling. I just love those kids. And, to spread love where love wasn't, that's never a bad problem. It's never a bad thing to do, right?
Absolutely.
And it can change lives. Just caring and investing in someone that no one else sees, that can change lives.
Definitely. And that's an excellent segue into our break. We're going to take our break for our sponsor. What I want to do on the other side is talk about your book and get more information as far as how transitioning to an author now. That's another transitional stage. So we're going to pick back up. We're going to pick back up on that on the other side. So for right now, let's go for a word from my sponsor.
Okay.
The playbook for growing a local business online is simple. Capture new leads, conversationally convert those leads into sales, turn those customers into positive reviews, and then reactivate those customers into repeat buyers. And that's exactly what our platform does. In order to consistently generate new leads, you first need to be found. The quickest way to get search engines like Google to put your business at the top of search results is by having a steady flow of positive reviews. With our platform, you can show up in search and stand apart from your local competition by easily collecting new customer reviews through text. But getting found is only the beginning. Most consumers choose the first business that responds to them. So unless you start conversations with potential customers almost instantly, they'll go somewhere else. That's why we make starting conversations with website visitors as easy as clicking a button, connecting you instantly through text message so the conversation doesn't end when they leave your website. And we bring all your leads, no matter where they come from, into a single conversation stream that supports text, email, video messaging, Google Business Chats, and even Facebook and Instagram DMs, so you can respond faster and more efficiently than ever. When it comes to turning all those conversations into customers, we make collecting payments just another convenient part of the combo, so you get paid faster no matter how they prefer to pay. Next, you'll want to turn your new customers into happy reviews, which is a snap with our new review request quick actions. The more conversations and customers you generate, the easier it becomes to drive repeat business. We make reactivating contacts into customers as easy as, yup, you guessed it, the push of a button. With bulk actions, you can send out text and email campaigns to generate new sales whenever you have a new update, promotion, or story to tell. We make modern online marketing simple. Let's start growing your business today.
And we're back. Welcome back to the King Connections podcast. I'm here again with author, opera singer, and teacher, and advocate, Kay Sparling. Now, Kay, we're now going to transition. We talked about your background as an opera singer a little bit, the internet, learning a little bit about your background as a teacher. But now I kind of want to talk about your book, your writing background, and those things as well. So with that being said, let's talk about Mission THAW and what was the genesis behind that, and lead us into understanding of what the book's about.
Well, Mission THAW is based on true facts. I fictionalize to protect people, because of the content. And once you read the book, you would understand, oh yeah, these people don't want to be known, So it's set in the very last years of the Cold War. And Caitlin Stewart, our protagonist, she is an American that has just won a Fulbright to go over and be an apprentice at a major opera house in Europe. And unbeknown to her, the CIA has been vetting her at home, in the United States for the last 3 years. So undergrad and grad school, because she's just doing really great things. I mean, she's an Iowa farm girl, and she ends up winning international competitions while she's in school. And, this kid just can't lose, and so they're looking at that, and they're looking at, her background, where she came from. And then they're also vetting just her psychologically. And she doesn't know any of this. So when she gets over, within 3 weeks, she realizes that some very strange things are happening when she's just walking about town. She's always being followed. She figures that out. And but yet it's not a foreigner that seems to be following her. It seems to be an American young man or young men. And so within a couple of weeks, she is literally kind of escorted into a car and taken to a park, and 3 CIA agents approach her and start their recruit on her. And of course, this is just totally unbelievable to Caitlin. I mean, the last thing she was planning on doing in Europe was being in a cloak and dagger scene, and so she just kind of goes, I'm sorry, I don't, they go, no, we really do need a virtuosic opera singer to fulfill this mission, and this mission is quite important, and we have tried several European singers, it is not working, we really need, you fit all the slots. And so she stands up, she says, I'm sorry, I what am I gonna do, hit a high C? Because they go, well, no, you're gonna this could bring down the Berlin Wall. And that's when she says, well, what am I gonna do, hit a high C and knock it down? I mean, I don't get it, I don't see how this would work. This makes no sense to me. And they said, well, sit down and we'll tell you. Well, she's just curious, and how she decides to listen. And formula, comes about immediately. Here is a great, what she thinks she wants, a great operatic career ahead of her, with all the trimmings, the jet set life, the fashion, the whole, all the, Berlin Wall and help a whole lot of refugees not be human trafficked.
Mm.
Well, she she does have that, and they knew that. I mean, they knew her father went to World War II. They knew how she had been brought up, and they knew that they had her, because for her to stand up and walk away from that would not have been acceptable. That was not the Stewart clan, way. I mean, so she says yes, and she gives up a great budding career and literally just uses opera as her cover. And the more that was, first she has to be trained for a year, but then when they really put her in, she's just supposed to, um, she's very high profile spy. So she's an opera singer as a cover, so she can be, invited to all the opera balls and all, and the cartel that is running this human trafficking is a lot of dirty politicians that are working with the KGB over in East Germany. And so um, they say, well, these are really dangerous people, but all you have to do is be seen and, be the favorite prima donna. They'll invite you, and then you can just listen, because you're very good with languages. You can just listen to conversations and then come back to headquarters and report. Once in a while, we'll ask you to plant a bug, because back then, the surveillance wasn't what we have today. We really did have to plant bugs, right? And so the CIA did it. So anyway, um, so that's what she agrees upon. But then all of these plot twists keep happening, and it's very fast paced, and to where she has to go deeper and deeper into danger in order to find out the information they need to shut down this cartel.
Mm.
Then they find out not only are they doing this human trafficking thing that we're trying to get NATO and all to be aware of, but they're also, looking around for blueprints of a dirty bomb to sell to Iran. So, the stakes just went a whole lot higher. So now there's like two missions in one. And both the CIA and the MI6 are working on this mission. And the best spy in the world is director of the mission. He is MI6, and he is what literally we would have considered the real James Bond at that time. And he's her trainer. And they many times have to go in together, because she is the one that gets the invitation, but he's there to protect her. And so this just keeps going and going, and it ends up in the Alps. And the idea is to get proof of these literal slave trades of people, and what the GDR, East Germany, are doing with them is not what they promise in the refugee camps. They get to these train stations, and it's a whole other story. And so this whole double team is racing to get the proof that this is happening, so they can shut it down. Because if they shut down that human trafficking, that free labor, so to speak, then that's the last. The East Germany's on their last leg, just like we found out USSR was a little later. Okay, and so that is what will bring the Berlin Wall, because they just can't exist anymore economically. So that is what Mission THAW, The Precipice, is about. It's a very unlikely feminist protagonist, but yes, an opera singing spy.
Now, did I hear you mention it correctly? Did I hear you correctly? I'm sorry. Did you say it's based on a true story and you changed some names?
Yes, it's all the facts are true. And I
Okay.
just changed the names and descriptions of people. Yes.
So my question now is, why this story from your perspective? Why was it important to get this out? Why now? And then how did you feel finally getting it completed?
Like I said, there were 5 full drafts before I felt the story was written in honor of the true story. Not being a writer myself, just being, I've read all my life, and I've read in this genre a lot, but for me to craft the book, that was much more difficult, the way I thought it should be crafted. But it finally got there, using several different editors and, taking a class or two in between. And the answer to your first question is twofold. The reason I would write this story now, well, first of all, it's to honor all those victims that were in this book, and to honor a lot of them obviously did not make it through those camps and stuff they were taken to, but like the children would be sent back to the refugee camps. So those people would be adults now, to honor those victims and the victims' families. That's very, very important. Also, I have a very deep respect for people who work in espionage. It's not like most of the movies depict. It is a very sacrificial life. And at the very end of your career, if you make it to the end of your career without being killed, you are just absolutely, you just go into the woodwork. It's not like you come home and you're a celebrated soldier. You never existed in the first place. So therefore, nobody can say thank you for your service. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And then if you are killed in action, you're a star on the wall without a name, because that's how the CIA wants to represent you. And if your family goes to a memorial service there, they hand a star without a name. So I thought it was time, because I really, really, really know the spy life. I thought it was time for someone to tell a more realistic story of what we really do, as a spy, rather than, strap ourselves to a bomb and blow ourselves out of a jet at the beginning of a Mission Impossible movie. Maybe somebody does that, but I don't know anybody that does that. But it's dangerous, just in making it real, and all the psychological stress of being a spy, remembering your cover. They'll give you a whole book about a life that you're supposed to be, and you have to memorize that. And it's very, very long and very detailed. And you have to become that person. And you got to be thinking on your feet all the time. And most of the time in a foreign language, right? Once you're in the field. I mean, spies have to be exceptionally smart, intelligent. Then they also have to be really great actors. And then they also have to be trained in all the things that they need to be, like martial arts, for instance. Okay. So, it's kind of like being an opera singer. There's a lot of facets that have to go together when you're in the field as a spy. And I think that's fascinating in itself. And you don't need to strap yourself to a nuclear bomb out, blow out of a jet. I think I'm proving that now that people are reading my book. They're like, yeah, that's pretty much a page turner. You just don't know what's going to happen next. And to see how they have to create stories on their feet very quickly to make, to get to the next point. Because things happen. It's like, oh, plot twist, we got to figure out something else. Now let's figure out another way to manipulate this person or this situation, And so what I'm hoping, and it seems to be true, is when people read the book, they're on Caitlin's back the whole ride. And she starts from not knowing anything and learning all the way, And I think that is exciting for them. And it also is very, it enlightens them what really spies are like. So I think that's another group of people I wanted to honor. And then third of all, I wanted to honor all the people that are being trafficked right now for the very same reasons. Nothing ever changes, it seems, right? We get rid of one, and then another one pops up. Ukraine. I could just, name them all, but I won't. I think everyone understands. So the International Labor Organization says there are 21 million people being trafficked today.
Wow.
Worldwide. 21 million people. And, I get upset with my fellow Americans sometimes now because it's like, well, I haven't seen any human trafficking. It's not in my backyard, Well, the other day, I live in a very small college town in the upper Midwest. And 3 weeks ago, there was, headline news. 7 men in this city were arrested on human trafficking violations and prostitution underage. If you go north of me to a reservation, young girls underage are being snatched from the reservations nearly every week.
Wow.
So sorry, folks, it's in your backyard now. It's not just across the seas, where you don't think it matters, right? It matters everywhere. And so what my hopes are, another thing I hope people take away from the book, and I think they are because they're saying, wow, that made me really think. I think I should get involved. First of all, if you even think there's any human trafficking, there's lots of places you can report it, and you don't have to even give your name. So please, if you think you see something that might be human trafficking, report it, get involved. Number two, be aware of it and try to give money to organizations that are fighting it. There's plenty of them out there worldwide. But this is something that people don't want to think about unless it's their daughter that gets snatched or their niece that gets snatched. But you know what? If we stop it, then nobody is going to get taken.
Absolutely.
And so that's my main really political goal with this book is to teach people about human trafficking because it's horrendous. And I witnessed a lot of it in that book. And I did not exaggerate one little thing. So there's some graphic things sometimes in that book. And I'm sorry if that makes you sensitive, but I want to drive it home,
So did we leave off former spy off your list of transitions?
Oh gosh, that will never be answered. If I was, I couldn't tell you, right?
Absolutely.
Let's just say I know a lot of spies and be done with that. And I interviewed a lot of spies, and we'll just leave it at that.
That's fine. It's funny. I just saw yesterday Mission Impossible Day of Final Reckoning.
I have not seen that yet, but I go to all of them though. I think they're entertaining.
They are. So when you were saying this, part of me is seeing that, especially you started off by saying strapped to a bomb, and you made that reference there. But then at the same time, bring home the human trafficking part to it, the realism, as opposed to the Hollywood spectacle that we see on the big screen. And definitely thank you for, I'm always, one thing, impressed, and at the same time grateful for someone who sees an injustice, understands that this is how I have to respond to it. This is my way of responding. And then you take that action instead of putting it off and never doing it. So I want to applaud you for following through with that. When you got the message to say, here's what you need to do, and you actually follow through with it. So definitely want to applaud you for that. And
thank you.
I want to now talk about kind of another one of my frameworks of fully human is being principle centered and having core principles. One of my favorite books, I call it like my Bible, as I reference it. It's not a book I've read once. It's a book I read on a daily basis. It's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. And he talks about the importance of governing your life according to principles that govern your behaviors. And the difference between principles and values being like even gangsters can have values. Like we're not going to sell drugs at schools. or we're not going to involve families outside of the actual gangsters that's involved. Where principles of life changing, and you break yourself
Mm-hmm.
against principles like gravity. It's a principle. So, with that being said, my question for you is: do you have core principles that kind of govern your life, and have they evolved over time since you've made these different transitions from different roles you've had as well, or have they kind of just stayed true?
Well, I think due to my incredible background from my parents, I think they were planted there right from the very beginning. And those were love one another. And I think this one is very, very important, at least it has been in my life. Before you judge, just stop and stand in that person's shoes and think about it for a while. Because, you were just mentioning that even drug dealers and cartels say they don't want to, you know, sell at schools. Well, Hitler was very good to dogs. He was so he loved animals. I mean, so we can find with the most evil people,
Right.
on earth, you can find some good. And that was one thing my dad used to talk about. But I think that having those things taught to you and practicing them takes practice, so to speak. And am I better at that now? Well, I'm a lot more patient. I listen a lot more than I used to. Um, and I don't judge as quickly. But I've been having some discussions with people lately, and and everyone has their right, of their point of view. But like some people say, well, okay, there really isn't evil, and I would have to disagree with them because I've seen evil, and you can debate where that evil transformed from. Maybe they were abused. Maybe they are mentally ill. Things like that. But actions are actions in my book, and I have seen some pretty evil stuff go down, and so I like to try to think that at this point, especially working with young people, that if I see that sort of breeding, try to get in there and, find out what's going on, and, and try to fix that, because usually it comes from fear. I think fear, it propagates so many negative, reactions and actions. And if we can get people, see, fear comes from not really having a good idea of inner self,
Mm.
not good self-respect. There's no good self-discipline. There's no good, self-love. And then, that anger and that fear and that hate just start coming out this way, and I think that we have to be very careful when we applaud those kind of people. And right now that's happening in a lot of society, and so it's sort of getting to be my soapbox to kind of fight that, you know fight the power that be, if it's that kind of power. That's one thing that my parents taught me. And at the very beginning of the book, I forget exactly how I worded it, but I said I dedicated it to my parents, and I said, for teaching me to have the courage to take a stand. um, and I just feel that the older I get, the more courageous I become about that, you know because if you don't, life goes fast, and then you're sorry you couldn't have done something when you could have. So I just think that every experience, whether it's a challenge or it's a very negative and painful thing, I think that teaches you to have more self-confidence and self-respect. And then that just, gives you more power, if you want to use that word, to fight these things because you don't really care.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we reached the top of the hour, and I want to ask one more question as we get ready to wrap today's show
Okay.
up. And that question is going to really be centered on your legacy. And my question is, when someone finishes Mission THAW or reflects on lessons you give in the book,
Mm-hmm.
what essence of you do you hope remains with them?
Of me or the story?
You or the lesson, the
Okay.
what they've learned.
That the world is bigger than their backyard, and that they must care about the plight of other human beings, even if they are totally a different culture and they are totally far away from them. That they have to think more globally and they have to think about more humanly.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for, again, like I said, being fully human, writing your book, having such a wonderful life. It's a lot of questions I could definitely ask, but it's hard to get all that out in 1 hour,
Sure.
within 1 hour. But I think you've had a fascinating life. Again, the fact that I couldn't imagine the mental toll it would take to be an opera singer at the biggest stage, at the greatest levels of what you got to go through. Like I said, the mental preparation, and then the detox that once you're done, and how you still got to navigate with people and relationships in your life. So I have a ton of questions about that I didn't get a chance to get into.
Yeah.
But I would still like to have a second show with you where we can just really delve down.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. There about, I would say when, it's the adrenaline that you're always on. You can't come down from that very easily. You just kind of live on an adrenaline high all the time when you're working in that. Yeah.
Well, is there any contact information you want to share with our listening audience? Websites, where you can get your book from, Amazon?
Yeah. Well, you can literally get my book on any online sources that sell books. Amazon is the primary one. It's in 3 forms there: Barnes and Noble, Apple Books. In Australia, Booktopia. In Canada, Indigo, and I can't remember the other one up there. I'm sorry, I went blank. But yeah, the best way to find out everything about the book is just go to kaysparlingbooks.com. And there's just pages of editorial reviews and social media contacts and where to buy the book. So that would be the easiest thing, kaysparlingbooks.com.
And even though this is live and it's been broadcast live, we always 7 or 10 days after the show we post it again, and when we do that, we're going to include the links that you mentioned, so folks can actually click on the links to the actual book as well. So your website, any social media channels you want to share with them, or any other contact information?
We're on literally every social media as far as social media goes. So this show, once you send it to me, will go on, I think it's 10 sites of ours. So yeah.
All right.
So
well, Kay, again, thank you again for being on the King Connections podcast. Thank you for being fully human, living the life that you lived, and being a servant leader that you are, and a great person that you are. So
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. And so until our next show, I want everyone to continue to connect with intent and strive to be more fully human. Thank you all.